It's been quite a morning of trying to figure out how to juggle this next really cool portion of the show. Uh, my guest, I teased it at the beginning of the show, is going to be Ann Hillman from the newest Out North project, Mental Health Mosaics, and we were going to do this on Zoom, and got in, played the first track, started to get everything set up, and I've spent the last, I don't know, better portion of an hour realizing the Zoom wasn't going to work. So we have Anne on the phone.
Hi.
Hi, Anne. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks
You know,
for. Oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say, all things considered, this is a very COVID type interview. Like, we're going to do it in person. No, I got sick. We were going to do it in Zoom, internet problems, and now we're on the phone. So it's kind of reverting back to classic radio, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'll take it. I'll definitely take it. This was my first time trying to figure out how the phone works too. So, yeah, it's been quite a fun morning. And Yeah, so I'm really excited to have you on because I'm so excited about this project, and I should come clean with everybody. I've been involved with this project for a number of months now as well in my
Which I'm grateful.
in my through my professional side. This is my volunteer side. I'm not a professional DJ, if you couldn't tell. But I work with NAMI Anchorage, and I'm the executive director there, and we at NAMI Anchorage really, really value the peer perspective. Really, all of our programs are run, facilitated, and taught by peers. And that's one of the things that I really, really appreciate about this Mental Health Mosaics project is it's bringing so many voices in so many ways. So it's not just voices that, come from our throats and our mouths, but voices through art and everything. As I mentioned earlier on the show, this is a multidisciplinary project. So I guess before I get too far along on that, and would you tell us a little bit, about the project, how and why it was conceived, and so on and so forth? Kind of give us a little intro into what we're looking at here.
Yeah. So, again, thanks very much for having me on the show. It's kind of exciting to be on the radio again. So Mental Health Mosaics is, as Jason mentioned, this multidisciplinary look at mental health. The idea behind it is that mental health is something, we all have. I know, it's trite. We say it all the time, but it's true. But it's this issue that affects absolutely everybody on the planet, and not just on an individual level, but on a community level because of history and because of current events. And Mental Health Mosaics understand, through this project, we understand that, I can talk about this all day, and I can talk to people with amazing stories all day, and someone's going to really connect with that, but someone's not. So we're also working with artists and poets who are exploring mental health through all these different means. As well as I'm working with an organization called A Window Between Worlds, and together we're creating, they use art as a form of healing and to help people work through trauma issues. And together we're creating a workbook and hands-on activities that people can do to process through these ideas. So Mental Health Mosaics came about in part, honestly, because of some of my own mental health issues. I had done radio for a really long time, working a lot, reporting on a lot of issues that intersect with mental health. So reporting on issues around incarceration, around houselessness, and around mental health itself and resilience and ways that we can build off of our strengths. And I ended up leaving a job I accept now for a lot of reasons, but in part because I was depressed and wandering for a while, ending up at another job that I learned brilliance amounts. But I was crying every day and couldn't get out of bed. And eventually it was like, you know what? What I care most about is talking about mental health and all of its corollary issues. So one of the board members out north, Indra Araga, was like, hey, we're thinking of doing a journalism thing. And I was like, let's do this. And then with her, with Aaron Willihan, and with Jason, and with others, and just input from community members, we kind of figured out what this might really look like. And here's the key point. A lot of journalism projects, and this was important for me as a journalist, but a lot of journalism projects stem from newsrooms and stem from people in positions of power, and that's really what kind of controls the narrative and how you focus a project. And there's reasons for that, some good, some bad. But a project, like I've always wanted to shift how that works. I've always wanted, instead of someone else from a similar reporting background or whatnot working with me to figure out story ideas from just listening, but actually have a group of community members say, all right, from our lived experiences, from these conversations that we're having together, this is what the focus needs to be. Because mental health is this massive, massive topic. So how do you hone that down? So we brought together a group of 6 different people who are peers, people who are healers, people who have really different lived experiences. And they came up with the first 10 topics of the Mental Health Mosaics podcast. And we use that as the call for art. So there will be art associated with each of these topics. And we're using it as the prompts for this workbook. And we'll be having conversations live and over Zoom. Yay, COVID. And so that is Mental Health Mosaics in a really long, rambling nutshell.
Oh, that's great. No, you hit on so many great points and so many of the aspects of the project that are really important to me as well. So, one of the things that I really, really appreciated about how this the whole project was conceived and constructed was that inclusion of more than a single editor's voice or coming from the newsroom, as you mentioned, right? And I appreciated that there was effort to bring both different personal perspectives as well as geography. I mean, there were some it wasn't just Anchorage centric necessarily. Can you talk a little bit about the process of recruiting the advisor members? How did that all roll out?
To a degree, it was sort of random. Like it was putting feelers out into the world because, as I mentioned before, I've been reporting around these issues for a while, and so I knew to reach out to the mental health consumer web, which, for those who don't know who they are, they're a really small organization actually in Anchorage that specifically caters to individuals who are currently houseless or others who just need a drop-in center for mental health issues, and they provide support. So I specifically reached out to them. We knew that this was, this is a project for everyone, but it's also very much an Alaska project. And so just speaking to various connections and figuring out, okay, who could maybe bring in the perspective of someone who is an Alaska Native traditional healer or has knowledge around that issue. And so there wasn't a formalized process other than specifically knowing that we needed diversity in voices, diversity in perspectives, and places in life. And I love my advisory board. I think they bring in just this brilliance that I could never have. Like Mahogany, MC Mahogany Magnetic, who you'll hear from later because she's also a poet. She's so open about her life and her experiences of having been diagnosed with PTSD and with bipolar disorder. And I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to be a trans woman of color. She brings in these perspectives that aren't typically represented in a classic news product, but B, she's just smart, Mm-hmm. And that's just true of absolutely everybody on the board. A young woman, Dash, she, works for Covenant House and can talk about a lot of she's in her bio, she's specifically I bring the Pacific Islander love. And she does. I don't know what that's like. And so it's, not a formalized process. If I did this again, I don't know of the beauty of a formalized process versus just knowing people who care passionately.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, the reason I bring that up is I, while you and I have been talking about this for a while, I wasn't necessarily a part of bringing the advisory board together and was really impressed with everybody and with the process and how everybody really bought into the process of working together to kind of drill down to 10 topics. And it really is one of the things I appreciate so much about the project is how, how the advisory board has come together and acted together on this, and it's so special. So.
Yeah, and before everyone joined, I had one-on-one conversations with folks just to let them know kind of the proposed structure of this project, because we were still working that out. They really helped us figure that out, and just let them know kind of what this process might be like, because I've done it with absolutely everyone I've interviewed. This needs to be a collaborative process, and people need to understand that it's not always going to be comfortable. And also, just recognizing the process, I'm going to screw up. Of course I'm going to screw up. I'm a human. And we need to be comfortable enough to talk through with each other to make sure, all right, this is going forward, this is okay.
And I think I take a quick moment right here to pitch the website, because on the website you can actually take a look at the advisory board, and there's bios for everybody. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the people behind the project, and the perspectives that were brought into choosing the topics and everything. And the website is mentalhealthmosaics.org, is that correct?
Yeah,
right.
mentalhealthmosaics.org. You can go to the Out North website and click on Mental Health Mosaics at the top. That'll get you there as well. And at the moment, it's a little bit bare bones because I'm building out the episode one page. But each episode page will include not just audio, but also transcripts, as well as art images, as well as poetry, and a lot of links to resources. And we're going to try to make this as accessible as possible. So I do say that when folks start looking at this, if you have accessibility issues, let us know, because we need to fix it.
Right. That's a great point. One of the other aspects of this, I guess before we move on to some clips that I was hoping to touch base on, was the, there was a call for art that went out for this, and I know that the project received over 50 submissions, of which,
awesome.
Which 10 will be chosen, and it's specifically 10 because they are going to line up thematically with the various episodes and the topic. So. And maybe I gave a little bit away there for what your answer to my question would be, but could you talk a little bit about that process? And I suppose that pairing up with an organization like Out North has kind of helped with that aspect as well. The visual art is not necessarily mine or your background, so
no. No, I would say specifically, this is an Out North project, and this is an Out North project because Out North does something that traditional media companies don't do. Out North is very much there to amplify voices of underrepresented communities, and very much there to promote local art. And so when we went into this call for art process, which, again, I had no clue what we were doing. So luckily, there's a woman named Cecilia who knows what she's doing, and luckily, Out North board members have a clue. But we were defining art really broadly because it can encompass so many things. It can encompass performance. It can encompass poetry. We have a lot of poetry submissions. And for me, it was extraordinarily important that we advertised this call for art in places that you wouldn't typically see a call for art. So I didn't want to just attract people who were known artists, though some applied, and wow, they have amazing work. But I also wanted to attract people who would never normally think to put their pieces into a call for art submission. We made sure to send that out to all of the regional hospitals, all the to local Native organizations. We put it, ANTHC sent it out for us. Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of people posted it and reposted it because we wanted to make sure that it was reaching folks who wouldn't necessarily see a call to art. Posted it in the web. We posted it in coffee shops. NAMI helped us post it. Anchorage Youth and Family Network helped us post it. So, a lot of different providers around got the word out. Because And it's actually not a surprise, even the slightest, that we got a lot of calls, because there's such an intersection between mental health and absolutely everything. And art and poetry are exquisite ways to express things that words by themselves just aren't going to encompass. And I'm really grateful to not be on the selection committee, because I don't know. I have no idea how they're going to pick. Like, I have no idea. Like, works. I'm not an emotional person. Maybe lately I am. But, like, some of this stuff, like, I'm tearing up. It's just incredible.
Oh, that's so great. I haven't had the privilege to see any of the art submissions, but I really can't wait. And so on that note, what's the future for the art? There's thematic sort of, they go specifically with themes for certain episodes. So can we assume that we'll see the art released at the same time as the episode? But then is there going to be some sort of, larger show or collection where they're all kind of in one place? Or do we know yet?
I would go with a combination of all of that. Yes, minus the first couple episodes, just because of timing. We will be releasing the art along with the episodes, and they'll live side by side digitally. The goal is to have one centralized exhibit, ideally end of January, beginning of February. Details of that are still being worked out, in part because we don't know what the pieces are. And so finding a space that's accessible to everybody and appropriate is, we need to know what it is before we figure that out. We are trying to figure out spaces that people can access without necessarily going inside, because Delta's really bad right now. COVID's really bad right now. And we want to ensure that it's accessible to everybody, including people who wouldn't necessarily feel safe indoors. And we need to keep our community safe. So that's another factor. The library, the Anchorage Public Library, has some really cool different ways for display, like making collections available digitally, called BiblioBoard. So I'm going to work with Stacia and Sarah over at the library, hopefully, to set something up like that. But again, the format's going to vary a little bit depending on what we get. But the goal is to make things as accessible as possible. I've talked to the library about how do we maybe display some of the work in some format there, along with displays of resources that they have, because the library has amazing resources and people. So, yeah. So I guess it's to be determined, but it's coming, and people should still be excited, even if we're still working out details.
Cool.
This is all very new.
Yeah, and again, I really, really appreciate the inclusion of art as a means of expression, and folks can sometimes express themselves in ways that they may not have otherwise been able to through typical communication or just by speaking with somebody. However, that someone's own words are really important, and so and what I really like about this project is the audio component, is that you're not just able to get someone's words, but you're able to get and hear them expressing them. So you can hear in their voice the passion, or like just little things like inflection and stuff like that don't come across on the written page, can be so powerful. And so I was going to use that as a segue to maybe get to one of our clips. That we have a few clips.
I think that would be wonderful.
Yeah, and so is there a particular one that you wanted to start off with, or?
I'd love to start with one of the clips from Jackie Engelberson, who she's actually works at ANTHC. But we spoke because they do this project called the Blanket Exercise, which I won't get into too deeply, but basically it's this exercise to help people understand what colonization has done to Alaska and how that's affected Alaska Native peoples and affected the entire state. But the clip that I've chosen from her, and the reason why I think this is important to play first, is it's Jackie talking a lot about her life and how all of these massive community forces, both historical and present, have affected her life. And why I want to start with this one is because I think we so often approach mental health as an individual issue. And it's not. Like, we're not existing in a void. We don't exist separate from the realities of our ancestors and the realities of community members around us. And she really gets to that and how community things affect individuals and how individuals affect community. So I'm so grateful that she spent so much time with me a couple weeks ago now, I guess, and would love to play that clip if we could, please.
All right.
I grew up in a very complicated family system, and I know that we all loved each other, but there was trauma that was carried over through generations. My parents experienced trauma from their parents, and my grandparents experienced trauma from their parents. And I honestly don't know how far back it goes, but I would imagine it goes back pretty far. And I think some of it is rooted in some of the things that happened to our community and perhaps how people were treated many, many generations ago that still shows up today. And so I grew up thinking that there was something wrong with me, thinking that there was something wrong with my family, and that there was something wrong with my community, and that, some of the challenges that I had in my own life, I struggled with depression, I still do. And then eventually I struggled with substance use. And I thought that was because I was Native. And I thought it was because there was something wrong with my family. And I thought that it was just kind of my destiny and like it was going to happen and it was inevitable.
Just because you were Native?
Yes. Yeah. Because of messages I received, I think, from everybody. Like everybody gave me these messages. Certainly when I was in school, I was a high achiever. I didn't have a lot of like Native friends when I was in high school, and I would hear people say things about Natives, and I'd be like, "Oh, they're not talking about me, though." And it took until I became an adult to really understand. It's like, well, even if they weren't talking about me, they were definitely talking about some of my cousins, or they were definitely talking about like my auntie or my uncle, And so like, yes, they were talking about me, and I just thought I was like one of the good ones when I was in high school or something. And then I had this like crashing reality when I was on my own and an adult and trying to just like deal with all these complicated things that I had experienced in life and like wondering what's wrong with me. And I know that this is true for other people and all over the place. And I know that there are still people who are living in these really complicated patterns in their life because of historical trauma, because of intergenerational trauma, who are internalizing that and thinking that there's something wrong with them, or maybe thinking that there's something wrong with everybody around them, and not understanding that there's been a lot of things that have happened to us as a people, as family systems, that are just really difficult to overcome. And unless you have access to resources, and unless you're like aware of what's going on, like you're not going to be able to get the help. You might not even want to. And if you think that there's something wrong with you, you're going to think there's probably something wrong with going to therapy, or there's probably something wrong with going to treatment, or there's something wrong with taking medications that can help manage your mental health. So there's like all these really complex thought processes that go on with people, and the added like racism and stigma associated with a lot of the things we talked about: substance use, mental health, being involved in the criminal justice system. That's just like all these different barriers that make people not want to access care.
That's quite the clip.
Yeah, and again, that was Jackie Engrickson, who is she's a senior program manager with the Behavioral Health Department over at Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and she helps run this program called the Blanket Exercise. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's quite the clip because because there's so much happening in this world, and you can't ignore racism, and you can't ignore all of the biases that we all bring into every interaction every day, and how that affects everybody, that we interact with. And that is such a running theme through so many of the interviews I've done. And I've done a lot of really varied interviews. with people from a lot of different life perspectives, but kind of this running theme is it's like you have to check your biases. You have to understand what your own biases are and how they're going to affect the people around you in the situations, especially when dealing with mental health, and especially when how you interact with people who might be in crisis.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was, I mean, just hearing about, how she internalized things in the past, that are, now that she has some distance from that and some perspective, realizing, how unhealthy that can be, and it's stuff that kind of we all can fall prey to. But, hearing, again, getting back to the voice and hearing somebody speak in their own voice and sharing this, I think this is a clip from the first episode. And so hearing this clip from Jackie and all that's packed in there, and the need to talk about it, and the need to confront our own biases, and the need to, both look within ourselves and out into the community to see how biases can be structural and systemic. A lot of that starts with the simple act of breaking the silence, and it's so important, and that's the title of the first episode. So, would you talk a little bit about that importance and why that particular topic was chosen as the first episode?
Jackie's actually part of the second episode.
Oh, sorry.
Focusing, no, totally okay. Because the second episode is really focusing on the effects of colonization and white supremacist culture on mental health. And I moved that to the second episode because those are such foundational ideas that we need to get into our heads. But the first episode is breaking the silence, and all of these topics overlap. How do you not overlap? How do you not have colonization overlap with what your identity is? How do you not have your identity overlap with how what it's like to be a parent?
Right.
But the advisory group chose breaking the silence as the first episode, with a little bit also talking about how do you handle a crisis in public. But they chose that for the first episode because that really is the first step, and it's not the easiest step. And it doesn't mean that you have to go on the radio and talk about your mental health issues. But it's just the first episode especially is full of people talking about why it's important to break that silence, and all the little things you can do to do that. You can help your friend break the silence, not by saying, hey, yo, let's talk mental health, but just by being there, by literally just being there. And you can support people by just accepting that sometimes people are different. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So they wanted to start with breaking the silence because ultimately this whole project is about breaking the silence. The whole project is really about how do we see mental health as this comprehensive and universal thing that talking about isn't weak, talking about is strong, and talking about is no different than talking about, your dog or your movie that you just watched. It's something we all experience, and sometimes it sucks, and sometimes it's amazing.
Yeah, I know a couple of things there, right? So the prevalence of mental illness, right? So the statistic that NAMI uses, National Institute of Mental Health, and so on and so forth, 1 in 5 Americans experience a mental health condition at some point in their lifetime. And that's mental illness, right? We all have our own mental health. And we all need to help to manage that. And the more that we can talk about that and create comfortable spaces and just opportunities to acknowledge that we have it, the better. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited about this project, because it just really continues with that mission. And certainly I feel when I grew up, these weren't the kinds of things that you talked about, not publicly. And I know, generations prior, and I feel that, I'm watching my kids, how they interact and how they talk about it. And I'm seeing that, it's anecdotal, but, I feel as though I'm seeing a real, openness and willingness to talk about it from these younger generations, as we as communities have been willing to talk about it more and more. You know, I work with an amazing group of youth called MHATS, Mental Health Advocacy Through Storytelling, which just, you know, does just that. Sharing their own personal stories to help break that silence, to let other folks know that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to seek help. And you know, and I'm here to talk about it, and I'm here to help you find help if you need it. So yeah, I'm really excited about the project for that particular reason. So yeah, now should we get to another clip here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another clip.
So I guess we've got Jared up next. And do you want to give a little intro?
So Jared Mayer is he is a writer. He, I think, near as I can tell, comes in and out of Anchorage quite a bit. And he's really open about having a mental health diagnosis of bipolar. And he's really open about, like, what that personal experience is like for him. And so this is just a clip of him talking about what it was like when he was finally given the diagnosis, because we do have a whole episode kind of talking about what a diagnosis means and doesn't mean, and kind of what goes into that whole process. So here's Jared.
It felt validating to have someone listen to what I'm saying and be able to put kind of a name on it, for someone to, like, listen to that and recognize the things that they're hearing and, you know, let me know, no, you're not crazy. There's just something that's going on in your mind that affects you in these particular ways.
And so with that validating feeling, did it help you sort of understand differently what you had been experiencing over the past few years?
It's a process. It's a journey. While there's that sense of validation that someone recognizes a specific problem, it was difficult for me to not initially just still feel broken. Like, okay, so there's a terminal illness in me. You know, there's a problem that can be assisted with things, but doesn't ever go away. And so it's difficult to know that having a permanent illness like that, the effect that it can have on people around you, and the effect that it can have on your personal and professional lives and social lives. So when I got the confirmation that there was something going on with me, but then I also had to deal with the reality that this was something that I was going to have to live with. And so it was difficult not to feel overwhelmed by that revelation at first. But, you know, to go back about that, about it being important to have a network of supportive friends and everything, when you discuss these things with them, they can give you that reassurance that it's just something that they're going to walk with you on that path and help you find ways to heal or to help deal with it.
Yeah, and so that was Jared. Go ahead, Ann.
Yeah, that was Jared Mayer. I think he's moved on to New Orleans at this point. But yeah, it's, you know, I've heard such varied things from folks about being diagnosed. And for some, okay, it's this jumping off point to figure out, all right, how do I get help? Like, what's the guidance for help? For some, it's like something that they don't want, and it doesn't mean anything to them. Like, labels don't really mean anything. And so, yeah, it's a much more complicated world to navigate than I guessed when going into this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, labels are naming the diagnoses. It's all kind of tricky, you know. Sometimes it's. I appreciate the folks that approach care from a behavioral standpoint, because I think just experience with folks that I know, I've seen diagnosis shift. And while they can be really helpful in just kind of giving a name to something, sometimes that's just important in and of itself, but they can be limiting by that same factor. It's the same with receiving a diagnosis, right? I mean, there's a certain relief in having a better understanding about what is there. At the same time, having that diagnosis can be really isolating. There's as opposed to other illnesses with other organs, there's so much stigma on mental health and mental illnesses because it's often perceived as a failing of that person and not the fact that one of their organs just isn't functioning in the typical fashion. And so, that's why it's so important in my perspective to have podcasts like this coming out and projects like this, not just the podcast, but the artwork as well. Again, breaking that silence, breaking that stigma, because we see so often that folks just limit themselves. And out of fear of judgment or what have you. And there's some, I suppose there's some denial, and you kind of go through all those stages maybe when you're first coming to terms with some of this stuff, and it's going to be a slightly different journey for everybody. But knowing that others are going through this is so important, and that you are not alone. That's sort of a mantra, motto, rallying cry, what have you, for so many organizations that work on this front. Just letting people know that you're not alone in this, because it can feel terribly, terribly isolating. And so to hear folks like Jared talk about that is great. It's the more that we can hear folks in their own voices sharing their stories. And so, again, hats off for this project and all the good that I foresee it bringing to our community.
I also actually want to shout out another project that's happening right now. That's been going on for a while, actually. It's there's a man named Ralph Serra who has his own podcast called The Anonymous Eskimo, and he just talks to people, primarily Indigenous people, about their recovery journeys and what's gotten them there and their strategies. And he started it because he was on his own recovery journey and he wanted support, and he needed support in a different way than going to AA. He's pretty hilarious. He is a musician. He has a Rasmussen grant. He's doing a lot of stuff to do exactly what you just talked about, which is, letting people know you're not alone. Like, other folks are going through this journey right now as well, and this is what they're doing to their little steps to get through, big and little. So I would definitely recommend folks go check out the Anonymous Eskimo podcast. Put it in your queue right along with Mental Health Mosaics, exactly at the same time, and you'll have a dose of togetherness, honestly. Great.
And and so I guess on that note, where can folks find the Mental Health Mosaics when it drops?
Well, you can already subscribe. There's a trailer out in the world, so go to wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you're on an iPhone, probably that's Apple Podcasts. Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. It's also available on Spotify. I could list absolutely every podcast player.
All right, all the things.
They're actually on things. I love distribution things. But seriously, subscribe, and then once the first podcast episode, the full episode drops, you can rate us, and that does in fact actually help other people find it. Every time you hear someone say that at the end of your favorite podcast, it's real. Like, rate the thing. It helps.
Right. I guess before we get on to the next clip, other than subscribing and listening, are there other ways that folks can get involved in the future or support or? Yeah.
Yeah, there are. So we will be having events. In fact, we're doing an event alongside the Anchorage Alliance for Violence Prevention and the Mountain View Public Library on October 23rd at 11:30 a.m. October is Domestic Violence Awareness month. And yes, domestic violence and mental health are linked in so many ways, including not being able to get out of relationships because of this emotional bond and just dependence that people have developed. And so the focus of our event is we're actually using shrinky dinks. I don't know if people remember those, but little plastic things that shrink up to create charms for keychains and for bracelets, tangible things that remind you of your own strengths and your own abilities, so that when you're facing a challenging relationship, you remember, you know what, you can do what you need to do in that moment. And so we'll be talking about healthy relationships with some local knowledge bearers and making charms and using art as a way to kind of process and heal and remind us of our strengths. So that's October 23rd at the Mountain View Library at 11:30 a.m. And then once the podcast episodes start dropping, first one's due on October 20th, the week after they drop, we're going to do a Zoom listening club. So people have book clubs where you have to read hundreds of pages of a book you may or may not like and then talk about it. Podcast clubs are way cooler and way easier. Yes, I'm totally biased. But folks listen to the episode of Mental Health Mosaics on their own and then come together on Zoom so we can talk about it with a bit more depth. And maybe that means sharing stories. Maybe that means just saying, hey, this really jumped out at me. Maybe it just means sitting quietly on Zoom together knowing you're not alone. Like, this is our podcast club. We can do what we want with it. So I'll be posting links for that. And then more events to come in the future. So that's the event side of thing. I mentioned earlier that in addition to the podcast, I'm working with an organization called A Window Between Worlds to create worksheets. So they're kind of artistic prompts, if you will, for people with any level of artistic skill. So, for example, I have 0. But it's prompts, like the first one is thinking about breaking the silence and, like, how do I talk about mental health or present myself around mental health issues on the outside? What are my thoughts on the inside? And how do I want to break the silence in the future? And how do I get there? So, ways to interact on your own, ways to come together as a group, and then more details about the art show when that's a real thing. I am always looking for more folks to talk to, because interviewing people is my absolute favorite part of this. There's so much to learn from everyone. And if you want to financially donate, we are a little tiny grant-run project. So all of that is on. You can find out more at mentalhealthmosaics.org.
Great. And I think maybe we can use that as a way to get to a piece of art that, may become part of a performance at a show or something like that. But you want to set up this poem we're about to hear? Yeah. Yeah.
So as has been mentioned a million times, we're really looking for a lot of different avenues to help people connect to these issues. And so Mahogany Magnetic, who's on the advisory board, who is kind of a figure about town because she creates great performances and beautiful poetry. And she agreed to write a poem for each episode. And so this is her poem for the first episode called Break in Silence. And it speaks for itself, though we will on the website have a line-by-line explanation of it because I don't understand poetry as well, and so having her be able to explain it really helped me. But this is Mahogany's poem.
All right.
About life on the equinox. Like, I know the what is and what nots, slung over bones and grave insights that cosmically spiral on late nights into places between spaces. I'm looking for traces of strength. I need help. I have lost my way. Don't think I'm going to make it another day. There are no beginnings and it never ends. Alone, isolated, loneliness, no friends. For all of my nerves are bad. I can't help but feel sad. I can't help but be funky. A no bath, having food and television junkie. Laying around depressed on myself. I'm not the same as everyone else. It's just can't be me in bubbles with rainbows and troubles. From rising too high, too fast, burst, smash, pop, crash. My soul on ice, heart on fire. I sure do miss true desire to feel better. So please come hang out with me later. 'Cause right now I'm a hot mess. Constant turmoil, I digress. Breaking silence.
All right. And
Yeah.
Mahogany Magnetic. That is the first of 10 poems, and that is part of the first episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And then,
Yeah.
and that you said that's also going to be included on the website in text form?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that excellent.
Yeah, so you can read it to yourself. You can hear her very full explanation of it. Yeah. But for the moment, I think just let people sit with it as it is.
Yeah. I may share that on, with Mahogany's permission, maybe share that on the show in the future. Every once in a while, I throw a poem or two in on the show here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, MC Mahogany Magnetic. People check her out.
yeah.
Magnetic is Magnetek. I should never spell things out loud. That was a poor choice on my part. I just wanted you to be able to find her.
Fair enough. Well, Anna, I've really enjoyed the conversation. I really can't wait to for when the first episode drops. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to share any last thoughts or words or links or any of that jazz.
Risk of being repetitive, mentalhealthmosaics.org has more information. Subscribe to the podcast, Mental Health Mosaics, on any podcast player you use. And feel free to shout out to me on Twitter. I'm at Hillman_Ann. There's also, of course, at Out North Radio on Twitter. And I really look forward to interacting with everybody who's listening in some way or another. And thank you so much, Jason, for A, your guidance, and B, for allowing this takeover of your show. And yeah, I'm really excited about this. I have had such an extraordinary privilege of listening to people's stories and spending so much time with people and just having my own biases smashed. Things I didn't even know I was thinking, surfacing. So yeah, Mental Health Mosaics is a great exploration of people's personal stories about life with a lot of different mental health conditions, and the goods and the bads and the healing and the strengths. So thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. And we might do a follow-up episode or a follow-up appearance on the show at some point. So thanks again so much, Ann Hillman with Out North's newest project, Mental Health Mosaics. And definitely check it out. We're going to get back to some music right now. Here's 33.